Good morning. My name is Maxwell Milavetz, and I'm a law clerk at the United States Bankruptcy Court for the District of Utah. I have the distinct honor of interviewing Chief Judge Kevin Anderson on behalf of the 10th Circuit Historical Society today. Judge Anderson has served on the bench since 2015 and has been Chief Judge since 2024. We are here in his chambers in June 2025 in Salt Lake City. Good morning, Your Honor. How are you?
Good morning, Mr. Milavetz.
Thank you for sitting with me and having this interview. I know this is an incredible opportunity to hear about you personally, because I've never heard a lot of these stories, and because the general 10th Circuit community and the judicial community is probably very interested in hearing about you. Would you mind talking to me about your parents and your early childhood? Where were you born?
I was actually born in Ogden, Utah, but we only lived there for 6 or 7 months. My dad had an opportunity in California, and he took it. And so we moved to the deserts of Southern California in 1957.
Wow.
So I consider myself a SoCal kid.
Very good. And what were your parents doing around the time that you moved?
Well, my parents had interesting backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
My dad's family was poor.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather had challenges of dealing with. He liked to drink,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad at the time when they got married was driving a road grader. My mother, her mom got divorced when she was young. This was in the 30s. That was a very shameful thing to happen at that time, and especially in Utah. So she kind of had to live with the stigma of being a single parent child. But they were both smart, and they were both motivated, and they were out to make better lives for themselves. And so when my dad had the opportunity to go work for an aerospace company in Southern California, even though he had no college, I think he'd gone. He played football for BYU for one semester, but then he decided he wanted to get married. So he had one semester of school, and was able to, though at the time, without education, get a job in the aerospace industry in Southern California, because it was just booming at the time. That was in the mid 50s.
Wow.
Things were happening. That was the right stuff. Chuck Yeager, X-15. XB-70 programs, the astronaut program, everything was focused on that. So he took that opportunity and made the most of it.
That's incredible. And what did he end up doing in the aerospace industry?
Well, like I said, my dad was smart and motivated, but he was working in electronics. Mm-hmm. He didn't really know anything about electronics, but he said it just came to him so naturally. And he was, like I said, motivated. He would study. He was taking correspondence courses. He would take courses out at a junior college. And in the end, he worked his way up to be a manager testing aerospace platforms, jet engines, airplanes, those kind of things. So he made a big success out of his career, even though, and it's relevant to my story, because he never went to college, he had a much more difficult time moving up the corporate ladder. So his point to me was, you go to school and you get all the education you can, because you don't want to be held back the way I was. But he had a very successful career. My mother was a surgical nurse, OR surgical nurse, worked in the hospitals, did that for years. Again, they were both motivated to improve themselves, get education, and make a better life, and they did.
That's incredible. I imagine that must have instilled quite a work ethic in you growing up.
Absolutely. My dad's, the highest praise he could give you was, "You're not lazy."
Wow.
And I remember one time as a kid driving along the road, and some guys were literally digging ditches. And he pointed at him and said, "If that's what..." My dad was kind of a Clint Eastwood guy. He didn't say much, but when he spoke, people listened. And he said, "If that's what you have to do to provide for your family, that's what you do. You work. You provide for your family. You're the provider. You work." And he instilled in us a great work ethic, for which I've been very grateful.
That's incredible. How wonderful. And where in California did you grow up?
It's called Lancaster. It's just over the mountains from the LA basin. It was about an hour. It was a great place to live. We're an hour and a half from Disneyland.
Wow.
An hour and 15 minutes from downtown LA, and 1 hour from Santa Monica Beach, which in high school we spent a lot of time there.
Wow.
Sometimes on school days.
Excellent.
But there was the Edwards Air Force Base was out there. Like I said, the XB-70, the X-15, later the space shuttle. When I worked there, I saw the space shuttle land a couple of times.
No kidding.
The Skunk Works, the famous Skunk Works that made the U-2 spy plane and made other. All of my family worked in aerospace. In fact, the whole community was in one way or another involved with the Air Force or aerospace industries.
Wow.
Because they were so big, because there was all that space out in the desert, the Mojave Desert, just over the mountains from Los Angeles. So in a way, it was a great place to grow up.
I bet. How
in fact, I loved it because I could ride my motorcycle across the street, and there was literally hundreds of miles of open. I could have ridden my motorcycle from my house to Las Vegas if I'd really wanted to.
Wow.
But that's how wide open that area was at the time. So it was a great place for kids. We loved it.
I bet. And do you have any specific memories from your early childhood there? Or?
Oh, I have tons of them. I don't know if I have anything real relevant to say, but it was a great place to grow up. We spent lots of time out in the desert. When we got younger, or a little older, we got motorcycles, and we got a little older, we'd get old cars and fix them up and turn them into dune buggies and drive around in the desert. It was a great place. The other thing I really liked about that community, as I said, everyone was in aerospace. And it was a fairly diverse community, especially for the time, the early 60s, because you had lots of military people. And everybody made essentially the same amount of money. There wasn't a big disparity between the rich and the poor. So it was a diverse community, a really excellent place to grow up and be exposed to diverse interests, because people from all over the country had moved there, just like my dad, to work in the aerospace industry. So
absolutely,
it was a good place to grow up. I really enjoyed it. Big wide open desert to go do anything, 12-year-old boys can come up with, and we came up with a lot.
Wow, I can imagine. How excellent. What about high school? Did you attend high school in that area?
Yes, yeah. It was called the Antelope Valley, so I attended Antelope Valley High School. Again, a great high school, diverse, but pretty much similar financial demographics among everyone. It felt very inclusive. Everyone was included. You have the normal high school cliques, but generally it was a very well integrated high school experience. I really enjoyed it.
Excellent. And I imagine with your parents both working around science and engineering and technology, did you find yourself drawn to any particular subject? Or?
I wasn't a very good student. I was inherently good at math. I liked English, but at the time, this was the 70s. So the English class consisted of listening to Simon and Garfunkel songs and discussing what their lyrics meant. The sounds of silence, what does that mean? So my English education was interesting, but it wasn't very practical in teaching me. In fact, I'll talk about that, one of my weaknesses. I had a teacher in the 8th grade who was trying to help me be a better writer. And she worked with me, and she finally said, "You just don't have the ability to write
No way.
well."
Wow.
And this kind of segues into college, but I'll mention it because I got to college, took an English class, read literature, wrote articles, papers on it, and that professor told me the same thing. He said, your analysis is good, but your mechanics of English, grammar, spelling, punctuation are terrible.
Wow.
And he said, you're going to have difficulty in your career. Well, what can I do? And he said, go take some what he called bonehead English classes. English 101, that was just grammar, spelling, punctuation. And I did. And I think it's interesting to me. I've always thought back on the teacher in the 8th grade who told me I would never write well. And now that's an integral part of my career, which I enjoy doing and strive to be an excellent writer.
Wow.
So sometimes criticisms can be motivations to improve.
That's fantastic. How interesting. Wow. And I guess circling back to when you were in high school, did you do anything, I guess, extracurricular wise?
Oh, I was very involved in politics. I felt comfortable with public speaking. Part of that was, church experience, giving talks, so I felt comfortable speaking to groups. I was involved in lots of different groups and organizations, and usually ended up in leadership positions. But I did not know how to study, and I couldn't do homework. And so in high school, I was pretty much a C. I might even be a C- student because I wouldn't do homework. Well, and I was working. You're going to ask me about working, but I worked all through high school. That was,
excellent.
Again, my dad. You work. So I did. So that didn't leave me much time for homework, especially since I was interested in so many other extracurricular activities.
Very
But
good.
I went on a Mormon church mission, learned a foreign language, learned discipline, learned how to study.
Wow.
And when I came back, I went to college, and the first semester I got straight A's, and it just shocked me.
Wow.
But again, where I tried to take a weakness, not knowing how to study, not being disciplined, that proved to be very pivotal in me going forward with education in my career.
That's excellent. Wow. So what kind of jobs did you have while you were in high school?
Oh goodness! Again, my dad. So we got jobs as paper boys when I was like 10.
Nice.
We threw a paper. So I have worked consistently ever since then. So I had a paper route. There was some agriculture there. So anytime farmers needed help, we would build these irrigation wheels that would roll. He could build those, and we got like a quarter a piece for building them, and any opportunity to do that. I worked at some burger joints, Carl's Jr. I worked a graveyard shift on weekends during high school. I'd work from 12 to 8 in the morning.
No kidding.
Yeah, the restaurant would close, and I would clean the restaurant.
Wow.
And I really took pride in that because it was all greasy and messy, and you'd clean that up, and in the morning it'd be all shiny and clean. And my wife to this day says I'm the best kitchen cleaner of the family.
Excellent. Excellent.
Another skill
Absolutely.
that I
You
have.
build the skills early. That's great. How excellent.
But yeah, if there was work and money, I liked money. I wanted money to spend on dates. So any opportunity that came to work, I took it.
Very good. And would you generally save the money you made, or would you
No.
spend it on fun things?
No,
and
I would
enjoy yourself.
I wasn't a good saver. I would spend it. I liked to date. You needed money to date. You needed a car. You needed all the accoutrements of giving the appearance of a successful or someone who was worthy of dating. So
Excellent. That's a wonderful.
it's my wife who has taught me how to save.
Oh, excellent.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So it was she manages the finances in our house, and she's the one who's saved and put us in a good financial situation to retire.
Excellent. How great. So after high school, you then went on a mission. Where did you go?
I went to Denmark.
Excellent. And you learned Danish.
I learned Danish.
Wonderful.
I loved learning a foreign language. I loved being in Denmark. It was a beautiful country. Friendly people, as long as you didn't want to talk about religion. But I learned a great deal of self-sufficiency, tenacity, discipline, how to study, those things I'd already mentioned.
Excellent.
It was a pivotal experience for me. It changed me from this goofy kid in high school who didn't know what he wanted to do or where he wanted to go, and gave me focus, direction, and the tools to make it happen.
Excellent. That's very powerful. So when you returned from your mission, you then attended college.
I went to college.
Excellent.
I was the first one in my family, my extended family, to go to college. And again, that was so important for my dad. But they hadn't gone to college. I didn't really know how to do it. Another benefit on my mission, I worked with guys who they knew they were, in fact, that's part of where this concept of going to law school, but they knew they were going to law school and they knew how to get there.
Wow.
And they were able to tell me, this is how you navigate college, and this is how you prepare for law school, and this is how it's all going to work out. And then we came back and I roomed with them. And again, they were very pivotal in helping me navigate the college experience successfully and move on to law school. And I'm still very good friends with
Really?
them.
Oh, that's fantastic. Wow.
Yeah.
So you attended Brigham Young University then?
I attended Brigham Young.
And what did you study there?
I studied international relations. I had, when I was in high school, my thought at that time, because all my family was in aerospace, everyone was in aerospace, I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to be a jet pilot.
Wow.
And it was 1972, just after the Vietnam War. They were begging for people to go into the military. So I met with a recruiter, and I took some tests, like math tests and physics tests, logic, and scored well enough. And he's like, I can get you into the Air Force Academy. I can, get you a commission. I can get you a jet fighter. I can, and I was like, wow, this is, that's my dream. But then I met with an ecclesiastical leader to talk about my future and my plans. And, I was at 17, 18, was going to go into the Air Force Academy. And he gave me some inspired direction that I was to go to law school and become a lawyer. It was very specific and express. And it's like, that's not something I had thought about, but I trusted him and felt he was older and was wise and had good insight. And somehow when he said that, it clicked that that's what I was going to do.
Wow.
So instead of joining the Air Force and becoming a pilot, and every once in a while, especially when I watch Top Gun, I'm like, that would have been an interesting destiny. But
yeah, I bet. But you have worked in aerospace, at least testing jet engines.
I did during when I was in college in like 1978. My dad bought one of the first home computers you could bring home and actually do something with. It was a Radio Shack TRS-80.
Wow.
He brought that home. I mean, at the time, I think it was like $800 in the 70s. I mean, it was a huge expense. Yeah, it was big. But he brought that home and said, here, you should learn how to program because this is going to be the future.
Wow.
You see, my dad was smart and intuitive. And for some reason, I took like a duck to water to programming.
Really?
It was in BASIC and assembler, and I even learned machine language on that little funky computer. To record programs, you recorded them on a cassette tape recorder and loaded them in. That was the storage device at the time. A little black and white screen with some pixels. But for some reason, it just clicked. Programming just clicked for me. So when I went back to college, I took Fortran and COBOL and Pascal, all these programming languages. Mm-hmm. And again, at the time, anyone who knew anything about computers was sought after, especially by the aerospace industry. So General Electric hired me to be a computer programmer, to program the computer, to gather the test data on engines.
Wow.
And so it was hundreds of parameters of pressures and temperatures and fuel flow and thrust and all of this. and I worked in a train boxcar that they had converted to put the computer system in. The computer was the size of like a small stand-up refrigerator.
Excellent. Wow.
And it had these giant discs that were like this big, and it would hold like 250 megabytes
Wow.
of data. You know, that's like one song nowadays.
Yeah.
And we'd swap those out and load the data onto a tape, and you put them back on, and in front of everybody else was underground to run the jet engine, but for some reason I had to be above ground. I was the only one. And the engine was right next to this, so they had 6 feet of concrete in front of it, so if the engine blew up, I would be safe.
Good.
And when they would run it up to, they'd run it up to max throttle to see how far can you push this engine. We blew up an engine.
Really?
Yeah, but it would be so loud, they say you can't go outside because the subsonic frequencies are so low, like 4 hertz. If they hit your heart, they can stop it.
Really?
So it was kind of a crazy thing. So I'd be in that boxcar by myself, taking data points while this engine was, running it back and forth and doing all kinds of stuff. So
that's remarkable.
it was a great job, but I loved programming. What I liked about it was the purity of it. Either it was right or it wasn't.
Yeah.
And when you got it right, you knew you had it right. Unlike the practice of law. That's why they call it the practice
Well said.
of law. You know, you're never sure if you've gotten it 100% right. You always maybe could do better. But programming, I love the purity of it. You know, it either worked or it didn't. And if it didn't, I had fun troubleshooting, trying to figure it out. So
Excellent.
that was a great experience. And as we talk, you'll see how this understanding of computers early on has just really been pivotal in my career and the things I've done.
Wow.
Projects I've been engaged with.
That's fantastic.
So I saved up, I worked there for 2 years. I saved every penny I could because I knew I was going to go back to law school with the intent that, my dad, he was another one. You pay off your debts. You don't borrow money. You pay cash for cars. And that's actually served me well in bankruptcy too. But so I wasn't going to take out a student loan. I was going to work and save every dime I could get to go back to law school.
And so how was the transition between, the very on and off binary programming lifestyle and the sudden jump into the grayness of the study of law?
Well, it was a bit of a struggle because I didn't have anyone. I didn't know any lawyers. I didn't have any background in the law. There's so many things now that I wish if I had known, I could have been a much more successful law student.
Interesting.
And I was really annoyed at the law school. They said, don't read those Cliff's Notes and nutshell books. And I'm like, I could have read those during the summer. And I would have been way ahead. They said, no, don't read those. Just immerse yourself in the law. But I struggled the first year, and then I finally figured it out. So I kind of didn't do okay. Then I did well. Then I did really well my third year because I'd figured out how to study and how to prepare for it. But if I'd had some background and if I'd had some contact with lawyers before, it would have made it a lot easier. But
Excellent.
Again, I was the first one in my family to certainly have a graduate degree.
Wow.
So that was for my family, that was a big deal.
Absolutely. And did you feel any pressure being in that position to study hard or just?
That was just inherent. I've always wanted to succeed. If I could describe me, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed.
I don't know about that.
I've always said I'm just smart enough to know I'm not smart enough. But as a consequence, this fear of failure has always provided me a powerful motivation. I mean, in some ways I hate it because you're uncertain as to your competency, but that fear of failure has been the motivation to make me work harder, to continue to study and learn and try to develop the skills I need to perform the professional tasks that are mine.
That's very powerful. Were there any specific law school classes that stood out uniquely to you?
Well, and I have to bring in my wife at this point.
Please.
So I was testing jet engines. The jet engine blew up. They said, we don't have anything to do for 2 weeks until we get a new engine in. And I was single, and there wasn't much going on out in the desert of California. I said, I'm going to go back up to BYU and ski.
Very nice.
So for 2 weeks. So I jumped in my car and drove up and was skiing for 2 weeks and met my wife, future wife.
Wow.
And somehow I had dated a lot, but this was different.
Interesting.
And so, and she's like, well, you're going back home to work. I don't know if I'll see you again. And I said, yeah, I don't know. I've applied to all these different law schools. I don't know where I'm going. So I got home, and there was a letter from BYU offering me a scholarship to go to their law school. And I'd applied at a lot of other, at Duke and I don't know, UCLA and Columbia. But when BYU offered me a scholarship to go to their law school, the other schools didn't offer me a scholarship. I wasn't that good. And the thought that, yeah, I can go back and spend more time with Suzanne.
Wow.
So I did. And then we were testing another engine and it blew up.
Oh my gosh.
And they said, oh my gosh, this was going to be a big project. We have to lay people off. And I said, this was in June. I said, you know what, I'm going back to law school in September, just lay me off. And they did, but they gave me this great severance package. And so I'm like, well, so I went back up to BYU, dated Suzanne, got married 2 weeks before law school.
Wow,
and
congratulations.
Yeah, we've been married coming on 43 years.
Wow.
So anyway, that all kind of coalesced together to get me to law school, married, and get started out doing that.
Wow.
So my favorite classes?
Sure,
yeah. We're probably going too long, but let me cut to this. Yeah, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do because, again, I didn't have any real experience. I knew I didn't want to do criminal law. I hated reading those cases with the horrific facts. Friends said business law. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. So I took a bankruptcy class with, at the time, bankruptcy judge Ralph Mabey.
Wow.
Who, anyone who knows Ralph, he is the quintessential gentleman scholar. He's just the epitome of the kind of lawyer you would want to be. And he taught this bankruptcy class, and he made it seem very interesting. And Ralph became a pivotal character in my career through the years, not the least of which was I was midway through my third year of law school. I was working for a law firm doing insurance defense work, and one of their main partners just up and left and took half a book of business with him.
Oh my.
They said, we can't honor our offers because we don't have the work now. You know, it's a big change. So I'm third year through my law school. All the law firms have done all their hiring. I'm like, I'm going to get out of law school without a job. And that terrified me. Again, that kind of goes back to my dad. You know, you work, you have a job.
Yeah.
Like, I've gone 3 years of law school, I'm not going to have a job. What am I going to do? And so Ralph was very instrumental, and I talked to him, and he said, well, what if I wrote you a letter of recommendation to clerk for a bankruptcy judge? And at the time, I didn't realize Ralph was a nationally known bankruptcy figure. Everyone in the bankruptcy community knew Ralph. He was a superstar. So I didn't appreciate the significance of his letter of recommendation. But he wrote me a letter. I was able to land a clerkship in the bankruptcy court in Southern California, San Bernardino. The plan was to stay in California. My wife's from the Bay Area. I'm from Southern California, and that was the plan. But we got back there, and things were so expensive. They were so expensive, and law firms, for some reason, weren't paying. There were maybe too many lawyers. Law firms, the law firms in Salt Lake were paid almost as much as the law firms in California, but the cost of living was astronomically different.
Absolutely.
And so we said, hey, let's go back to Utah. And so we applied with some firms and got a job and moved back here in 1986.
Wow, excellent. And how do you think being a law clerk originally shaped your practice, or did it develop an interest in bankruptcy?
Oh, I found bankruptcy interesting. I liked that you had all of these different business entities. You know, one day you've got hospitals, contractors, individuals, small businesses, big businesses. I found it really interesting, and I liked learning about, you kind of had to understand what the business did to be able to assess and make determinations as to what you were going to do in their bankruptcy case. And so I really liked that. I've always liked learning. I've always continually tried to learn, and this just seemed in a venue that I felt somewhat comfortable in, bankruptcy. You know, understood the code, understood the rules. That I could still practice in essentially every area of the law, except really doing personal injury work or criminal work. But everything else, even divorce, you know, is impacted by bankruptcy. So I found that it covered a wide area of practice, but it was within a structure that I felt comfortable with and understood the rules and how it operated.
That's excellent.
Yeah, I have never been bored practicing bankruptcy.
That's fantastic.
For that reason, because you're constantly learning about other people's financial affairs or businesses, or how transactions are structured, and even more interesting, how they go south. And then, of course, as I've mentioned, my favorite are the fraud. I shouldn't say my favorite. What I find the most interesting are the fraud trials. How fraud is perpetrated. How do people persuade others to give up their money without the normal contractual safeguards to ensure repayment? So and we've seen a lot of very interesting characters come through the bankruptcy court. So.
Absolutely. Wow. So when you returned to Utah after your clerkship, you joined with a law firm here.
I joined with Watkins and Campbell. Vern Hopkinson brought me back. I'd been up here and interviewed and then didn't hear anything for quite some time. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, I mean, this is a little footnote, but it's curious to me as I've looked back after 69 years, the arc of my career path at times seemed very disappointing and inopportune. But it ended up being great. And an example of this is I'd clerked for the bankruptcy court and had gotten an offer from the Nevada Supreme Court to go clerk for them in Carson City.
Wow.
We were loading up the moving van to move to Carson City when I got a call from Vern Hopkinson and said, you know, we'd like to have you come, you know, you interviewed here 4 or 5 months ago, 6 months ago, we'd like you to come work in the bankruptcy department.
Wow.
And I was like, and he said, can you come back up for another interview? And I said, I'm loading my truck to go to Carson City. And he said, well, let me get back to you. So they went and had a meeting, called me up and said, we're offering you a job. We're paying this much, which is a lot more than the Nevada Supreme Court. We'll pay some of your moving costs. And I remember calling the truck company saying, we're not going to Carson City, we're going to Salt Lake City.
Wow.
And they probably thought, yeah, okay, this is a flaky guy. And we arrived in Salt Lake City, didn't have a place to live, didn't know neighborhoods really or anything. And Suzanne and I always joke that we essentially bought our first house. We walked into it. It was fairly new. It had a playground, a fenced backyard with grass for our son, and it was affordable. So we literally spent like 5 minutes or less saying, we'll take it.
Wow. Because
we were paying $100 a day for extra on this truck, and we just needed a place.
Oh my gosh.
And it ended up being a great, it was up by mouth of the canyon. Like I said, it was a little small starter home, but ended up being great. We always joke, we spent 5 minutes buying our first house.
Wow, that's fantastic. How interesting.
Yeah, so again, it's this curious arc of getting me back here to Salt Lake, getting me into bankruptcy to start with, and then ending up back here in Salt Lake.
Wow. And then you practiced in private practice here in Salt Lake for about 10 or so years.
Yeah, probably longer than that. I worked with Watkins and Campbell. Vern brought me back to work on the liquidation of the failed Utah thrifts, which is just essentially bankruptcy. You were liquidating assets.
Yeah.
So I remember selling condominiums, fully furnished condominiums in Deer Valley for $65,000.
Wow.
And we might sell one once every 6 months. They were hard to move.
Interesting.
I know that was the kind of thing we did. So we were liquidating assets, collecting funds, collecting receivables, all that kind of thing, and then that transitioned into doing bankruptcy work. And then I transitioned to work doing Chapter 11s with Anna Drake. Went to work for her firm, and she did a lot of big 11s. So that gave me that experience. And then we started doing some work for Chapter 7, Chapter 11 trustees, doing litigation. And I really liked that. And then that firm disbanded, it just seems a natural lifestyle of law firms. They form, they grow big, then they disband, and this one disbanded. So I ended up going to work for a Chapter 7 trustee. I did all of her litigation. That's where I got the chance to go do appeals to the 10th Circuit.
Yeah.
Which was fun. She was great. I was this young associate. And she goes, well, you did all the work. You go argue the appeal. I'm like, oh. And arguing appeals to me is the pinnacle of the legal practice.
That's pretty remarkable.
Really, I don't want to say stressful in a bad way, but it was exciting. And I felt like that was the kind of the peak of my law practice, was doing appellate work. I really liked it.
Wow.
And I got to do a lot of it as a trustee as well, and argued a number, 5 or so, 4 cases before the 10th Circuit and 1 before the 9th Circuit. I always really, you don't get those opportunities that often, but I really enjoyed getting that.
Wow.
So that's kind of my trajectory through the practice of law. Worked on some big cases, worked on the Sunbrook Golf Course case down in St. George. At the time, we had a lot of big bankruptcy cases filed in Utah. Now they're all filed in Delaware, Southern District, New York, Southern District, Texas. So it was a lot of good experiences early on with big, significant cases doing significant work.
Wow, how fascinating. So having had this pretty successful private practice career, what prompted the switch to apply for the Chapter 13 position and take on a public service?
That's another example of the arc of my career taking an unexpected turn. 2 things. One, I'd worked with a trustee, and I wanted to be a trustee. So I'd applied to be a 7 trustee 2 or 3 times and didn't get it, and was very disappointed. I'd started getting out of bankruptcy and just doing general litigation. So I had this Sunbrook Golf Course case, went on for 2 years. I was gone all the time. We were doing depositions in Florida and Atlanta, and then of course down in St. George. So 2 years just working on that case. And then it went to a jury trial before Judge Benson, where it was every day for 7 weeks.
Wow.
He'd start at 7 in the morning and we'd go until 2. Now, I had never done a jury trial, but Mike Homer, who was very influential in my career, he knew me, and he knew at the time I was teaching Old Testament Sunday school. And he goes, Kev, this is going to be easy. It's just like teaching Old Testament Sunday school. You're talking about this kind of obscure, arcane, difficult to understand subject and make it understandable to people off the street. That's all you have to do. Just pretend like you're teaching Sunday school. It was the best advice.
Really?
Because that was the approach I took. Yeah, you're trying to help these people understand the complexities of the financing and the construction of a golf course down in St. George. And that's how I approached it. And I actually, after those 7 weeks, I won. I won in fact, my client was the defendant. He was the builder of the golf course. We not only, the plaintiff lost, but we got a $2 million counterclaim awarded against his client.
Wow.
So I got this $1 million,
Okay.
yeah, they used to have a thing, the $1 million club. I mean, now that's chump change, but at the time, that was a big deal. I'm like,
a very big
hey,
deal.
I'm a member of the $1 million club.
Wow.
But anyway, I had gone through all of that. I was not a present parent for 2 years. And at the end of the day, I got this bonus check. And it was, good for the time.
Yeah.
But I'm like, was that worth 2 years of my life and missing out on my kids? And my wife, who's always been very wise, I said something to the effect, I said, I'd pay good money if I could spend more time with my family. And she goes, well, why don't we? And anyway, didn't tie that in. So I'd apply for the 7 trustee things, didn't get it. And then they call me and say, we're going to have an opening in this 13 position. Would you like to do that? And I'm like, why would I want to do that? That had no interest. I hadn't done 13s. I didn't want to do 13s. The reason there was an opening was because they were kind of pushing out the existing 13 trustee for various reasons. I'm like, why do I want to get involved in that mess? Well, they really persuaded me and talked to me and got me thinking about the transition because it would be a very different type of practice.
Oh, yeah.
And that's when because it was going to pay less money, but it would be more secure and it would be less time. And that's what my wife said when I said that thing, I'd pay good money to have more time. And she goes, well, then let's do it. So it was really that comment.
Wow.
And we'll get into it too much, but my son passed away when he was 22, and he was 12 at the time. So I'm glad that I took that different offer and spent time with my family when I might have had regrets if I had continued to do this heavy-duty, full-time, all-time litigation work.
Absolutely.
I liked it. It was fun. The other thing was I won big, but I wasn't sure I could handle losing. If I had lost, I think as elated as I was with the win, I would have been as perhaps more despondent with a loss. And I'm like, sooner or later you're going to lose.
Yeah. Oh.
The odds, nobody bats 1,000 in this business.
Yeah.
And that was another small factor, and there was a bit of, it was a great experience. You do a trial for 7 weeks. Judge Benson, who taught evidence in law school, I learned more about evidence in that 7 weeks than I'd ever learned in my career.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a great experience. So anyway, and it was a bit of a been there, done that, don't have to do it again, go do something different.
Excellent. So how did you adapt to the change of pace and change of material in the Chapter 13 trustee's office?
What I found out, what interested me is it was a bulk practice. I think when I took over, we had 2,000 cases. At one point, I ended up with 11,000 cases.
Wow.
But I thought this is a practice that is really going to be amenable to computerization. And nobody was they had these big computers, they called them RISC machines. They were like $80,000, and they had dumb terminals and green screens, and it would just do numbers. That's all it would do. And Windows had recently come out, and I said, well, why don't we do an office with all Windows computers? And we could. There's a lot of things we can do with computers to automate this processing, both of the financial aspect of it and the filing pleadings. Trustees have to file a response to every motion. They have to object to confirmation. There's a ton of, I think at one point, we were getting like over 1,000 papers every day that were coming into the office that needed processing. So anyway, and I remember some of the people going, well, that's going to be foolish. You're going to regret that. I've had more people tell me that about computers.
Wow.
If that won't work, you can't do that. It's not possible. I'm like, no, that's what computers do. This is what they're made for, to process, and these repetitious, things, we can automate it. So that interested me, coupled with the personal reason. And so I jumped in and started computerizing the offices, giving people, Max, one thing I did, it's because people would type up pleadings and they'd have to type up the whole thing. I go, wait a minute, you can have a computer just, mail merge in this from our database.
Yeah.
So I created a program using Word, using a SQL reader, where my staff just had to type in the case number, and it would create a pleading.
Wow.
With the captions and the case number and all those things that you could get wrong if you were manually typing them.
Yeah.
And they did get wrong. And then I go, well, then what can we do to, let's create templates with language that can automatically be plugged in for the various objections and the various things that go on. And then you can just, type a quick, customize it quickly. And people were like, wow, you're doing that? Wow. And so they started asking me to present on it. So I started in these trustee meetings with everyone around the country. I started saying, well, this is what you can do. This is how you do it. This is how it saves you time, saves you money, it saves you errors. You don't get the errors. And then the court was also transitioning to their electronic filing. So then we set up a system that every motion or paper or pleading had a code number that the court would enter. And we said, well, let's create a program that reads that code number and routes it to the person who needs to see it. So it'd go, paralegals were assigned to different judges. So it would route it to the people who needed automatically.
Wow.
Whereas before, when I first started, it was all paper. And the papers somebody go to the court and collect that day's filings.
Oh my gosh.
They'd bring them back and sort through them. And maybe by the next day, you had everything distributed. So anyway, those are the kind of things I'm like, you can program a computer to do this automatically, and we can save a lot of time. So those were the kind of things that got me some attention, and I just kept thinking, well, we can do this with a computer, we can do that with a computer. I mean, some of the other things we came up with, we called it the uniform creditor number. Same thing, just a coded number that creditors would put in their proof of claims. Trustees would enter it in their database, and it would tell them who the creditor was, what address to send it, what the claim amount was. It was all automated, because before you'd get a proof of claim, and somebody had to sit there and data entry that into the system. And I go, no, it'll read this number, that'll automatically input the data. And so for big creditors like Wells Fargo and I don't know, GM and Discovery Card and all these large national creditors adopted this uniform creditor number.
Wow.
So I was always looking for ways to make, and that became really fun for me. I really enjoyed that aspect of the practice.
And I believe you did the same thing for debtors making payments.
Oh yeah. And part of what this is how they used to have to do it. They had to go get a money order, and that would cost them at least $5. Then they had to mail it back to Memphis, Tennessee, where our bank was. Well, that would take 3 or 4 days. And if they'd missed a payment, there were drop dead dates for making their Chapter 13 payments. If they didn't make the payment, their case would be dismissed. So people were spending $25, $30 to overnight them with FedEx so their case wouldn't get dismissed. I go, this is crazy. This is crazy. We need to make it easier for people to make their payments, not harder. Used to be you could bring cash into the office. U.S. Trustee got rid of that, and I understand why. Used to be you could send in a check, and we would cash it. Trustee said, no, it's got to be certified funds. So we'd made it more difficult for Chapter 13 debtors to perform under their plans. And I said, I pay all my bills online. Why can't we do this?
Yeah.
So I met with a bank, And they said, yeah, we think we could do this, but we had to come up with all the protocols, how long to hold the funds, want to make sure they clear, how much would we charge. UST didn't like that we were charging. We made it a minimal, I think it was a few bucks, $2 or something, to do this. But we had to work through a lot of procedures so that people felt it was fair. It wasn't going to put, the worst thing was I'd get money and disperse on it, and then the check would bounce.
Yeah.
I had to count for every dime, literally, that came into I was a trustee.
Yeah.
I was in the trust business.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of $1 million a month flowing through my office in small checks of about an average of $400, $500. One time, when I merged offices, we couldn't reconcile 10 cents. The UST made me spend a year and a half to try and reconcile that before they'd let me write it off.
Oh my God.
That's how, and I understood it. I understood it, and I agreed with it. I was a trustee. If you couldn't trust the trustee, then I was out of business.
Well said.
So we had to account for everything. So anyway, getting back to it, I wanted to make it easier for debtors to pay it. I wanted to make it cheaper. And I wanted, it made the processing of the funds more efficient, easier. Again, it could all be done by computer. So we worked out this program, set it up, became a huge success. Now every trustee, every 13 debtor has the option to make their payments electronically.
Wow, that's fantastic.
But those, you see a need, you see a problem. You heard me say that the other day. Technology creates problems, but then it can also create the solutions.
Well said. That decision probably saved a lot of people a lot of time and money.
I was just like, we just kept making it harder and harder for them.
Yeah.
And I wanted people to succeed in their 13 cases. And if you could make it easier for them to make their payments, then more of them would succeed.
Well said. And your innovation also gained national attention. I believe you were elected president of the National Conference of Chapter 13 Trustees.
Yeah, I did a lot of things. I mean, another thing that was big was the National Data Center. That was in 2000. We started talking about how could we get all of this, trustees get all these claims come in, they get payments from debtors, and then they disperse money to creditors. Well, creditors wanted to know, is the debtor making a payment? Am I going to get a payment? How much will my payment be? These are the big national creditors.
Yeah.
Car lenders, credit card companies, mortgage companies. And somebody said, gee, right now I have to call 200 trustees every month to get this information. And we said, it's on a computer. Trustees have it on their computers. Why can't we make it accessible on the cloud? Really wasn't a thing at the time. It was coming, but make that data available to these creditors who need it. And so we came up with this idea. Creditors said, we'll help fund this to get this set up. People were saying, no, it won't work. It can't happen. I'm not going to let you store my data on the web for creditors to look at. Well, that was the hardest project I worked on. It took a number of years, but when we finally got it going in like 2004, the thing was a huge success. Wow. And to this day, it's an integral part of Chapter 13 case administration. And debtors could go on and see, did I miss a payment? How much am I paying my creditors? How long do I have left in my case? And debtors get free access.
Wow.
Creditors pay for it because it's now it's gigantic. But it's one of those things that, like, yeah, why don't we do this? Oh, you can't do it. And it's true, the technology wasn't quite there, but we kept pushing, and now it's become this huge thing that, to this day, is still a major part of the Chapter 13. I mean, that was just 3 of us guys, but I got involved. I was doing one of my presentations. The guy, well, this guy knows something about computers, so let's get him involved. And I was kind of too stupid to, my wife would say, why are you spending all this time on this? She's not paying you. And I'm like, oh, because I believe in improving the system. But it was kind of cool. I got in connection with that. We talked about it. Bill Clinton had a privacy czar named Peter Swire, and he held this big privacy seminar back in Washington, D.C. Well, I got invited to go back and to present on it, to explain, why why certain creditors needed personal information, including a debtor's social security number, their income, all of that, and how to protect that and only let the parties who are parties in interest have access to it. Because before, you could go into any bankruptcy court in the world and, it was Michael Jackson, some celebrity had filed bankruptcy.
Yeah.
You could go in and pull their file and, look at all their assets and their debts and there was no privacy protections. And then, of course, when we put it on the internet, they were really concerned about that. So we came up with the 5 principles of financial privacy that became a memorandum that's still followed by bankruptcy to this day as to, when should data be protected and when should it be made available to creditors.
Wow.
Yeah, so as a kid, that was kind of a heady thing to go back to DC and try to plot out how we were going to deal with privacy and access to bankruptcy information.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, it's been fun. And then I worked on, we have the NACTT Academy, which became the education arm. They do a weekly newsletter to everyone about consumer issues, consumer bankruptcy. They do webinars. They have a great web page. They put on seminars all over the country. That was another thing I was a founding member of. But when I was a kid, you've heard this story, but watching the movie Ben-Hur. And, Masala, Stephen Boyd, one of the opening scenes, rides into Jerusalem to take command of the garrison there. And Sextus, the retiring garrison leader, says, "Why on earth did you want to be sent to this difficult, God-forsaken location?" And Masala says, "Sextus, if you want to rise, do the difficult."
Wow.
And I just remember thinking, you look for things that other people can't or don't want to do. And if you go, yeah, I think I could do that, and sometimes you're too stupid to know better. That was the case a number of times, but we just kept going until we succeeded. And so I think I came to be viewed as somebody who could get from point A to point B. Maybe it wasn't a linear progression, but we would see a problem, come up with the solution, and make it work.
Yeah, that's incredible.
But I did lots of things, and as I said, I liked leadership. I just felt comfortable doing leadership, and so eventually was. They had a track. You start out as treasurer and worked your way up to president, and it was a 5-year track. And so I got involved in that and worked my way up. Did that and then you were president, post-elect, or whatever it is. So it was like a 6-year commitment, but it was a great experience. Travel the country, talk about bankruptcy. Trying to improve the system. Trying to make it better, trying to make it work better.
And you were the trustee during the 2008 financial crisis. How was that experience?
Bankruptcies exploded all across the country. But it was about an 18-month gap between the recession and filings, because people can hang on for a while. You pay one credit card and then you pay another, and you kind of play this shell game with it. It's not until what I call bankruptcy triggers that people file, where you get a notice of foreclosure, a repossessed car, or a writ of garnishment. Those things will trigger a bankruptcy. So people were hanging on for 18 months. And then we suddenly had just a flood of bankruptcy cases. But we could somewhat see it coming pre-2008, just like now, even though it's a very different market. Home prices were escalating. People started getting in, not to buy a home, not to fund mortgage loans, but to flip them.
Oh, interesting.
Mortgage companies got in. They didn't care. They weren't going to hold the note, so they didn't care that it was a good credit risk. In fact, it was done so sloppy, a lot of the notes were never signed.
Really?
So there was never a legally enforceable debt instrument. I mean, so everyone was flipping it. So what they were interested in were the doing the transaction, not holding the, it's like in It's a Wonderful Life with the Bailey Thrift and Loan. You make the loan and you hold the note and you collect the money.
Yeah.
So people became very careless. All they cared about was doing the deal, and then they'd sell it off to someone else to hold the note. And so a lot of bad deals were done. Home prices were artificially inflated. There was a lot of equity. You would get solicitations in the mail to take out 125% of your home value.
Wow.
With no closing costs. So people were doing that like crazy. We saw it. What they were doing is taking out money, taking out these second, third, fourth mortgages to pay off their bankruptcy cases. And Judge Bolden would say, you understand you're converting a unsecured, dischargeable debt and converting it into a secured, non-dischargeable debt, essentially.
Wow.
We don't care. We're going to save $100 a month in our mortgage payments. And she would be like, yeah, but you understand you're obligating yourself to pay $30,000 back over 30 years. People didn't. So we were seeing these refis, third mortgages coming out. And I happened to be in Washington, D.C. in September when Bear Stearns went under. And everybody was on their what were they, blueberries, raspberries at the time? Blackberry. And there was a look of fear and shock in Washington, D.C. And I'm like, something big has happened. And that was the beginning of the collapse. And I mean, in some ways, bankruptcies, the good times are the bad times for everyone else. And so, it was a big time for bankruptcy, and we had lots of them. But it was a foreseeable circumstance, I thought, that was generated through greed and improvident lending by a lot of people who made billions. And that money that wasn't lost. Someone got it.
Yeah.
Somebody made a fortune. And of course, what would happen is one house would go into foreclosure. Well, that would drop the value of every house in that neighborhood.
Oh, interesting.
And it just got this huge ripple effect that rippled through the whole country, including Utah.
Wow.
So all of a sudden, everyone was underwater on their home. They owed $5,000 on a home worth $350.
Yeah.
And that's not much of an exaggeration. And so then people just began walking away from their home. Why should I pay $500,000 for a home that's not worth that much?
Yeah.
And this just spiraled into this incredible downfall. Now, I don't think that's the circumstance now. I don't think we're going to see a repeat of that. But that's what happened, and it took years for the country to recover. I mean, another side story that annoyed us. The banks had all these underwater loans, and the property was going back to the banks. As trustees, we said amend the code to allow debtors to cram down the value of their mortgage to what its current value was, the way we do with cars or any other secured debt. And we actually went back to Congress to make this proposal because it would be better for banks to take the loss up front. Part of the reason it took so long to recover is the banks just dribbled out these losses forever. Anyway, I went back to Congress and they came and said, oh, the banks have already been here. They have this great program that's going to do this. It's called the HAMP program, the Home Affordability Modification Program. And so we're going to modify these mortgages and make them affordable. People will be able to keep their homes, and it's going to be great. We don't need to mess with bankruptcy. Well, the HAMP program, it's run by the people who created the problem.
Oh, interesting.
I hope I don't get into political trouble saying that, but it was true. The bankers created the problem, and now they're trying to solve it, and I believe if they had allowed mortgage cram down, even with a sunset period, the losses would have been, the pain would have been realized up front, but then the recovery would have come much quicker. But I come to learn about politics and policy and who has the ear of, anyway.
Interesting. Wow, that's fascinating.
I thought bankruptcy, and I'll say the same thing about student loan debt. Student loan debt should be, if people can repay it, they should, but there should be an option in bankruptcy to discharge it, because now there really is not. You can't do anything with student. In fact, it's worse in bankruptcy, because in Chapter 13 you can't pay student loan creditors more than you can pay any other creditors.
That's right.
So Yale came and asked me to do a study for them to look at, student loan amounts at the time of filing 13, and student loans amount at the end of it 13. And they were all higher.
Really?
Because of accrued interest, they couldn't pay them the full amount. They had to pay them the same percentage as other unsecured creditors. I'm like, what? You're putting people in a worse position now for filing bankruptcy rather than better.
Wow.
So, and we have this mature, sophisticated process to assess what people can pay based on their income with reasonable expenses. And why aren't we using that to help people repay their student loan debts on terms that they can afford? And in instances where there really is a certainty of hopelessness, that's the standard now, to get a discharge. People are never going to be able to repay these because they've gotten sick or they've had accidents, or there really is no prospect for them to make an income. Let them get discharged. And that didn't happen, and then we ended up with the mess we have now, where promises were made to forgive student loan debt, promises that couldn't be kept because they weren't legal. And they just started recollecting student loan debt in May, and people have gone 5 years thinking they're not going to have to pay them, and now they're in for a shock. Anyway, that's more political than I should get, but
it's interesting.
Bankruptcy could provide solutions to these problems that are big problems and that need to be addressed, but for whatever reason, people aren't looking at it as the option and the solution that it could provide.
How fast?
I have gotten way off. I've gotten way off the rails on this, but these are my.
Yeah.
These are the things I feel passionately about.
I bet. That's incredible. Incredible thoughts. But why don't we jump ahead to your decision to apply to be a bankruptcy judge?
Oh, yeah. That was never, I never thought that was in the cards for me. I didn't think my grades were like I said, I started out slow, ended strong, but I was cum laude. I wasn't summa or magna cum laude. And I thought, okay, that's not within the realm of cards. But in 2001, I just said, I'm going to throw my hat in. I'm going to see what happens. And so I applied to be a judge, just, what the heck.
Yeah.
And ended up being on at least the 5 finalist list.
Wow.
And that got back to me, and I'm like, wow, maybe this is a real possibility. Maybe it can happen. Maybe I've got a chance. Judge Thurman was appointed on that round. But it stuck that, and so I also started thinking, what are the things I can do to give me the experience and enhance my resume and show my commitment to, justice and access to justice and the bankruptcy system to improve my chances to become a judge. And so that became, starting in 2001, that became my focus.
Wow.
Of, yes, this is something I would really like to do, and that I think I could make a contribution to the bankruptcy system.
That's incredible. And what kind of actions did you take with that goal in mind?
Well, I continued to volunteer on a lot of national committees. I looked for opportunities to speak at national conferences. I wrote lots of bankruptcy articles for different journals and publications. I was looking for ways, and one, I was inherently interested in it, so it wasn't that big of a sacrifice. If you like to do something, it's not work. It's fun. So I enjoyed putting these things together, but I was kind of building this resume and looking for opportunities to be more deeply engaged in the bankruptcy legal system.
That's excellent. And then you got the call.
Well, all of us had to go through 3 times. So I went through that. The first time I don't count because I was a finalist. I didn't get a final interview, but I was at least on the list. The second time, when Judge Mosher got it, I was one of the 3 finalists. The third time, when Judge Marker got it, I was one of the 3 finalists.
Wow.
And so and it's a very disappointing experience to get that close and then not get it. And this last time I thought, do I want to go through this again? What the heck? But the third time was the charm.
Wow.
And it was the second most significant phone call in my life. When I got the call and heard from 10th Circuit Chief Judge saying, congratulations.
Wow.
And I felt like I'd achieved my primary, my bucket list professional goal.
Wow.
And that was very satisfying, and has been very satisfying.
It's incredible. So how, any reflections from your time on the bench? How about this? Would you mind explaining your judicial philosophy, or saying anything about how it's changed over your time?
Well, I was seeing Chapter 13 debtors and wanting them to succeed. I think really gave me a sense of making, the bankruptcy system is other than the IRS code, the federal law that most people around the country aren't going to be exposed to. That's going to be their only exposure to the federal court system is through the bankruptcy. We have, like I said, at one time I had 11,000 cases that were in Utah. And so I was very focused on commitment to access to justice. I want it, because these people are poor. They can't afford a lawyer. You're too poor to file for bankruptcy. We sometimes talk about that. So I wanted to make it more accessible. I also I always liked being engaged in the balancing between the rights of creditors to be paid and the rights of the honest but unfortunate debtor to receive a discharge, to make sure that both sides are being treated fairly, that debtors are repaying what they realistically can repay, and that creditors aren't being abusive or taking advantage of debtors. So I like the access to justice part. I like the intellectual rigor that would go with being a judge. As an advocate, you look for arguments that you can make for a position. And any good lawyer could take one position one day and argue the opposite the next and be equally effective. But as a judge, I'm supposed to be right. And I liked that. It was kind of like this computer programming, this purity of, I've arrived at the correct decision based on the facts and the law, and the analysis that would go into that, and the balancing of those interests. And so I like that aspect of it. I liked the research and writing aspect of it. I liked that as a lawyer, you have to be sensitive to the time you're spending for your client. Some clients want you to spend all the time they can afford it, and others you have to be very careful. As a judge, I could spend as much time as I wanted researching, thinking. I mean, you can't let things sit and let decisions be delayed, but you could really do a deep dive, again, because I'm supposed to be right. And I liked that. I could research as much as I wanted. I have 2 really good law clerks that can help me. I like the human drama of bankruptcy.
Yeah.
For individuals, their particular case is significant as a big, GM Motors or Enron. And the human drama of seeing, how did people get here? How are they going to get out? Are they going to be able to make the changes they need to succeed? I wanted to see people succeed, get a fresh start. As a 13 trustee, I got lots of letters from people saying, thank you for helping me through this process. I learned how to budget. I learned how credit really works. I learned how to be responsible and make regular payments. 10% of the people had created 90% of the problems that I saw. But 90% of the people just got in, did what they were supposed to, made their payments, cured their mortgage, cured their family support obligations, repaid the IRS, and exited bankruptcy with a true financial fresh start. And that was very satisfying.
That's incredible.
For me. So there were a lot of aspects of being a judge, and it's nice to be the boss, I guess. I'm not really the boss, I work for the district court in the 10th Circuit, but in this little confines, I'm the one making the decisions and deciding how things will work, and I felt comfortable doing that and tried to make the system better and provide people with access to justice, to help them feel that they were heard, but to ultimately make the right decision based on the facts and the law.
Yeah, and you've continued to do some incredible access to justice pioneering while you were a judge, such as your debtor's signature innovations.
Oh, yeah, not everyone likes that, but allowing digital signatures to be used to file a petition for bankruptcy. And you're right, what precipitated that was I would see Utah has one bankruptcy court in Salt Lake, but it's a big state. People were literally driving, if they were down in Moab or Blanding, even St. George. That's an 6 to 8 hour commitment to drive up to Salt Lake to sign a document to file for bankruptcy. And sometimes you needed immediate relief. I mean, it's unfortunate, but debtors can often be procrastinators. So they don't think about filing bankruptcy until the morning of the foreclosure sale. Well, if they're in an outlying area, that ain't going to happen. And you also had people in the trucking industry and people working in the oil industry up in, Nebraska and Wyoming, Colorado. And so it just didn't make sense to me, especially since every financial transaction now, I just bought a cabin. I took out hundreds of thousands of dollars in a loan, and I signed it electronically.
Yeah.
I didn't meet with anyone. If it's good enough for big loans, home loans, why isn't it good enough to file a bankruptcy petition?
It's well said.
And with the digital signatures, there are protections, safeguards, metadata that can tell you things if you think there's been fraud or forgeries or other things. To me, a digital signature is a better safeguard than a wet signature, which can be copied or manually forged by someone.
That's incredible.
So I pushed for it. The U.S. trustee was opposed to it. But again, this is like all these. Oh, you can't do that. You shouldn't do that. No, this is how our world is evolving. And AI is going to be the next enormous challenge for practitioners, is how to properly and ethically incorporate that into the practice of law.
Mm. Would you mind speaking to any notable decisions you've written or any
I'm not sure how noticeable they are to anyone other than the parties. When I write a decision, I have a couple of things in mind. I mean, bankruptcy happens fast.
Yeah.
And writing decisions now, it used to be you could say not for publication. It would just go to the parties. Mm. Now everything is on the internet. So everything, the whole world, literally anyone, anywhere in the world can read my opinions. Not that they'd want to, but they could. And so you have essentially a world of eyeballs that can look at your opinion and critique it. And of course we have certain writing standards, the Blue Book. Mm. And so writing an opinion now is like writing a mini law review article.
Oh, yeah.
We have to make sure your punctuation and your grammar and your citation structure and everything. So writing is a long process, and sometimes bankruptcy can't wait that long to get that done. So we do oral rulings. But in circumstances where I'm making a decision on an undecided issue of law, and I did write one regarding it was a divorce case, and the question was when a party filed for divorce, did the property become marital property at the time of the filing or at the time when the divorce court decided the allocation of the property, because then that determined what came into the bankruptcy estate. Well, I got this issue and I said, why do I shouldn't be deciding Utah divorce issues, because that would apply in other contexts outside of bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So I sent it to the Utah Supreme Court and said, you guys decide this issue. And they looked at it and said, gee, isn't there bankruptcy issues here, and isn't there an automatic? I'm like, no, I would have told you if there was. There's not. Just tell me, when does this, they called it an inchoate property interest, become coate in the marital estate?
Yeah.
When you file, or only when the judge decides who gets what property. And so they kicked it back to me. And I'm like, well, all right, if you want me writing Utah divorce law, I guess I will. So I wrote a decision deciding that it became, it was a sufficiently coate at the time of the divorce filing to become property of the bankruptcy estate.
Interesting.
And I did a similar thing with when does a hospital lien attach? At the time the person walks into the hospital, at the time services are rendered, or at the time they try to collect it. Anyway, I tried to get them to, because that's a state law issue, to get them to decide it. They didn't want to, so I decided it and said the lien attaches when the person walks into the hospital and asks for services.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
I've written on, I think a case that people pay attention to is when the distinction between acting as a trustee and acting as a lawyer for the trustee, because there's a merger there, and what services should be performed wearing which hat and which ones are compensable. The other reason I'll write a decision is primarily where I'm denying a discharge. And I've denied discharges for millions of dollars for people that's going to hang over their heads for the rest of their lives. And some of them are close calls. They're almost always involve fraud. And so I think I'm getting the full story, and I think I'm making the right decision, but I agonize over that because I understand and empathize with the consequences. This one guy on the last day of the trial, this 5-day trial for $4 million judgment, he made, I think he made like $300,000, $350,000, something like that. But I'm like, a $4 million judgment's gonna kill him, financially. And so he came in the closing argument, his wife was there, his kids were there, and they're all crying because, the other side was painting him as this bad guy, and we want to get our money. And that was a really hard decision to make. But when I deny someone their discharge, meaning I'm saddling them with this debt for the rest of their lives, I feel they're entitled to know everything I thought about, all the factors, how I interpreted the evidence. I felt I owed it to them to take the time and make the effort to write that opinion so they would have a full understanding of why I ruled the way I did and why, under the law, under these facts, I had to deny their discharge.
Yeah.
As painful as difficult as it was for me personally to saddle them with that debt, because bankruptcy is supposed to be about getting debt relief, but again, that's for the honest and unfortunate debtor, not for people who have engaged in wrongful conduct that resulted in debt. And I hope I'm not jinxing it. I've got 2 more months, but I've had many appeals, but I've never been overturned.
Interesting. Wow.
Because another aspect of this is sometimes there's no one there to defend my decision. It's just one party appealing, and the other side, for reasons I won't get into, doesn't. So I try to write a decision that if the appellate court reads it, can go, okay, at least Judge the one thing I don't want is Judge Anderson wasn't very careful, or Judge Anderson didn't fully think this through, or Judge Anderson didn't articulate the reasons for his decision. That would be painful. Getting overturned, somebody smarter, a lot smarter than me, says, oh, you got it wrong, here's the standard. I mean, there's nothing easier than going back and going, okay, the 10th Circuit told me to do this. Yeah, nothing easier than just doing it.
That's a good point.
So I tried to write decisions that were careful, thoughtful, hopefully understandable by the individuals who were impacted, and that would hold up under appellate scrutiny.
That's excellent.
So I like to write, but it's very painful. It takes a lot of work, but I felt better after watching Brian Gardner, who's the guru of legal writing, interviewing the Supreme Court justices, and they said the same thing, that they struggle and agonize and kind of bleed on the page with trying to figure this out. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'm in good. If they have to do it, and they're many times smarter than me, maybe I'm doing it right.
Wow, that's fascinating. Why don't we pivot to your experience as a judge in this court during the COVID-19 pandemic? It seems like, while it forced everyone into remote work, it also may have created some innovations, especially with this. It
really did. It just transformed and revolutionized how we hear hearings. As a matter, it came on so quickly. Maybe a 2-week period where we transitioned from live hearings to no hearings to we have to do something to have hearings because, as I said, bankruptcy moves fast. These things can't park. You've got money that's accruing and people not getting paid. Anyway, so, what can we do? Well, we can have telephonic. So we transitioned fairly quickly to all the parties just calling in on their iPhones and a tape recorder and conducting hearings that way. And I felt comfortable with that. People didn't like that they couldn't see my face, and I didn't like that I couldn't see their face. Fortunately, I didn't have to have any trials, just on the telephone. But I did hear some evidence and heard argument, but we made it work. And so we transitioned to telephonic hearings, and then eventually to Zoom hearings, which were much better and much approved. But originally, there were a lot of courts, and again, I felt more comfortable with technology, but a lot of courts said, no, you can never have a party appear by phone. They have to be here in person in the court. Even if they have to, and again, in Utah, you want them to drive 6-8 hours round trip to appear. It's a denial of access to justice. So, and anyway, we transitioned to Zoom, and that started working. But it was a very odd time. The Moss Courthouse was effectively empty at that time. I would come in, my law clerk would come in, everybody else, maybe Judge Marker came in occasionally, but he was so far down the hall I didn't see him. But it was like just me and my law clerk in the court, because I wanted to come in. Yeah. It felt safe, felt comfortable, felt like I could get more work done. And for a long time, and I remember the earthquake in March of 2020 happened, and I was driving down to the courthouse and get to the courthouse, and you can't go in, we don't know if it's safe, and there were cracks in the walls.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, I think it was mainly the drywall, but there were big cracks in the wall from that earthquake. So anyway, a few days later, my paralegal, or my law clerk, Amanda Rosendahl, and I were in there working, and we got this big aftershock, and we go, let's get out of this building for a while. So we go out onto the street, and downtown Salt Lake is completely abandoned. It's like one of these dystopian, not vampire, zombie movies. Where like, there's no one here. It was the most odd experience to be downtown and be completely empty.
Wow.
COVID was going on. The earth was shuddering under our feet. There was a huge sense of uncertainty as to what was going to happen, how long would this go on, how deadly would it be. I just remember the two of us, I'm like, this is kind of as bad as it gets for what is the future going to hold for for our country and the world. But it became clear that this wasn't going to go away quickly. We got to the summer and it was still going on. So we transitioned to Zoom hearings, doing everything by Zoom. At first I was just at my desk, and then we set up things in the courtroom so I would go in there. And we conducted Zoom hearings, and I found them to be effective and comfortable, and I thought it created an access to justice. It saved lawyers from having to drive downtown, pay for parking. If you came to a hearing, even if you were in the Salt Lake Valley, that was a good 2-hour commitment, even if it was a 5-hour hearing.
Yeah.
Drive, park, get to court on time, drive back to your office, and people could just, from their home, show up. And I felt it was reflected in the billings. Instead of billing 2 hours for a court hearing, they could bill the 2 or 3 minutes on some of them that we took. So I liked it. We did some trials. We had witnesses that were in Florida and back east, and they just appeared by Zoom. Saved everybody a lot of time and money and expense. I liked the access to justice, and I felt comfortable doing hearings on Zoom. Doesn't mean I'll have to say maybe the biggest disappointment of my judgeship has been that in, was it 2021, we moved out of the Moss.
Yeah.
And so we've been on Zoom ever since. And Zoom works, and it's convenient, and I haven't had an issue with it, but it has not felt, walking out onto the bench with a room full of lawyers, with live witnesses, with people, all rise, sitting down, people can see you, they can see your body language, I can see them and their body language. That's been not what I expected. Conducting court hearings on TV was not what I expected in connection with my judicial experience, and I'm sad I'm not going to be able to go back. I was looking forward to going back to the Moss and conducting court in those magnificent 1905 courtrooms.
Yeah, wow. What about your experience as chief judge? You've been chief since 2024. How has that been?
Yeah, our biggest, it's been curious that with the 2008 recession, bankruptcy skyrocketed. With COVID, they plummeted. Where actually the filing rates in numbers is the same as they were in 1987.
Really? Wow.
That's what has changed. And the per capita filing rate is the lowest ever. Number of people filing, per capita number of people filing, lowest since the 1978 Act. And yet the economy in some ways is worse than it was before the pandemic. So I'm worried something has happened here with bankruptcy is not being viewed as the potential remedy that it could be. I talked about it with the mortgage write-offs, and I talked about it with student loans. But for whatever reason, and Utah's economy is just exceptional. I mean, it's one of the top in the country, so we can kind of see it here in Utah, but that doesn't explain what's going on in the rest of the country. And so there's been a real worry if bankruptcy is going to be a viable option for reorganization, restructuring, and for individuals for financial relief. Mm-hmm. And as a consequence of that decline in filings starting in 2000, and we're still not at the same levels as they were in 2019, 5 years later. But the decision to appoint new judges, you have to be at a weighted caseload of 1,000. Hmm. And they kind of have this formula. They take your cases, your big cases, your adversary proceedings, all these things, and plug it in and kick out this formula. And it's, a weighted caseload per judge of 1,000. Well, when Judge Marker was set to retire, we were at like 986 or something.
Wow.
And as a consequence of this, that happened all around the country. The average weighted caseload used to be about 1,500. Now it's about 600.
Wow.
So as judges retired, they were not filling those vacancies. Happened in Colorado, happened in Oklahoma, happened all over the country. And we were worried it would happen here. And we were worried that that wouldn't be so bad if filings are low, but what if they spike like they did in 2008? How long would it take? At least 9 months to get a new judge, and trying to handle that caseload could be difficult. Anyway, we didn't have enough to get a new judge, and Judge Marker was going to retire in June of 2024. And kudos to him for agreeing to stick around another year to see if our filings would go up, and they did. And he stuck around for an extra year for essentially no extra salary. His retirement was the same as his salary, so he was essentially working for free. But he stuck around, and when they make the decision in March of 2025, and at that time, we were 1,001.
Wow. Wow.
And so we heard from the 10th Circuit that they would fill Judge Marker's spot, and so we're going to have the full 3 judges, where there was a very real risk of his position not being filled.
Wow.
And that would have been a loss. So kudos to him. Kudos to Judge Thurman, who has been doing this for 10 years without any additional salary, essentially working for free because he just loves it. And it's allowed Utah to have 4 judges where we're really only authorized for 3. So it's been great.
Yeah.
And even though the weighted caseload says we're low, I feel like we've, in a way, never been busier. So anyway, trying to navigate that, make sure that we would get a 3rd judge, work with the AO. I was pulling up my own statistics, trying to make projections of where we thought filings were going to go and what was going to happen. I like statistics. I like messing around with Excel and doing projections, and this kind of thing I did when I tested jet engines, making projections of what was going to happen to this engine. And so I'm like making projections what's going to happen with bankruptcy filings. And
yeah.
So that was a bit of a nip and tuck, and we got through that, and we're now going to have a full contingent of 3 bankruptcy judges come September.
That's fantastic. That's incredible. Oh, so would you mind speaking on how you've seen the bankruptcy practice change over the past couple of decades or so?
Oh yeah, and I'm running out of gas a little bit here, but I'll just say.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
It was interesting to me that there used to be, bankruptcy was kind of viewed as a lesser practice when I first got involved. And so as a result, most of the main big players in the bankruptcy field were women. Anna Drake, Harriet Styler, Mona Burton, Carolyn Montgomery. My 2 partners that I worked for as an associate were women, Anna Drake and Harriet Styler. And so it's interesting to see this transition from, it's a lesser practice, and which in a way opened the opportunity for women to get into it, especially in the 80s when it was even more difficult for women to become partners. All of those women were partners in their law firm. That has transitioned, and now we have fewer, I think, women leading the charge. Certainly Peggy and Annette Jarvis and Ellen Ostro. So that was interesting to see that change. We used to get bigger Chapter 11 business cases would be filed locally. So if you had a Utah case, Utah business, they'd file in Utah. There's been a huge transition to move all big business cases to Delaware, Southern District, New York, Southern District of Texas. And it's been unfortunate because before, I used to do a lot of big Chapter 11 work. You'd go over to court on first day motions. The court would be literally packed with lawyers, with all the parties who were involved. And wheeling and dealing and going out in the hall and talking. And trying to work through these first day motions, who was going to get to do what was going to happen. It was a really exciting time. At one case, we filed a big Chapter 11. We literally stayed up all night. The law firm brought in pizza and drinks. I think I crawled under my desk and slept for an hour or two.
Wow.
Because we had hearings at 8 that morning. So we were, and again, things weren't quite as computer savvy, so you had people, secretaries typing pleadings, and kind of worked all that day, and then went over in the morning and had 3 or 4 hours of hearings on first day hearings.
Oh,
I mean, that was really exciting and cool, and we don't quite get that. We've in Utah, we've lost a lot of the connection. We'll get it back when we're back in court, but it used to be you ran into everybody in court, going to court, you'd go out in the hallway, hey, I meant to try and resolve this, okay, let's do it now. Unrelated case. If you wanted to look at a file, you had to go to the court, pull the file, and they had this big room that all the lawyers would sit down and look through files. You couldn't look at anything online. So, and it was kind of crazy. Everyone was in there. You met your friends, you met your nemesis, but everybody was talking and exchanging information. There was a lot more. You knew people, you had a relationship to them. I mean, it was kind of clunky. Imagine I'd have to go, every case I want to look at, I have to go pull a file. Now we just pull it up on our desk. But so technology has been excellent and helpful in some ways, and in some ways there's been a diminishment in the human connection among lawyers. But anyway, we don't see the big cases. We see some, but not the way we used to. And as a result, judges and lawyers are losing those big Chapter 11 skills unless they're able to practice on a national level. And of course, we do have lawyers who do, but the local practice is not what it was. And in some ways, we've gained other skills, but it's unfortunate we don't get to practice at the Chapter 11 level that we used to.
Interesting. And I feel I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about your outdoors experience and your incredible experiences doing through hiking and fly fishing and expertise in that area.
I as a kid, I grew up in the desert, and I hated the desert. I wanted to be where it was green and water and mountains, and so fortunately the Sierras were close. When I really got into backpacking. I liked the self-sufficiency of it and the thought that I could do difficult things. I went on a week-long backpack trip with the Boy Scouts when I was like 13. I hiked with my dad. I did a 9-day hike when I was like 14, maybe I was 30, anyway. But when I was 15, I went on a month-long backpacking trip from Yosemite to Mount Whitney, the John Muir Trail. And I was the youngest kid there. Everybody else was in college, a bunch of college kids, which was fun for me as a 15-year-old. You're like, whoa, this is... But I liked that it taught me self-sufficiency. It taught me how to live on my own. I mean, I was stuck with whatever I'd brought, and if I didn't bring it, I just had to make do. And that was a great experience. It made me feel I could do difficult things, push through, tenacity, stick-to-itiveness. And I think that has served me well, and I always find the outdoors to be contemplative. I can't run. I'm not a good runner. It just hurts. But I can hike, and when I hike, I get that runner's high. And I like to spend time thinking, because I can really think when I'm in that zone. So that's been, and I still love it. I worry now I'm going to be physically I backpacked. The last time I went backpacking, I was 64, but I hope I can still go do some more.
Absolutely, I imagine so. Before we wrap, is there anything you'd like to share, or any pieces of insight you'd like to share, or anything you'd like to opine on?
Yeah, I've somewhat mentioned this, but I really believe, you've heard me say this before, Abraham Lincoln said a lawyer's stock and trade is his time and advice, but it's also a lawyer's credibility. And as a judge, I've been surprised how often I've seen lawyers destroy, and destroy is too strong a word, but wound their credibility by making arguments, taking positions, or telling me things that are not true, complete, and accurate. And if you lose your credibility, you've lost your effectiveness as an advocate with the judge. If the judge can't believe what you say, then you can't advocate for your client. The second thing is my father was really a man of integrity. I never heard him say one untruth. He was never dishonest. He was the kind of guy, if he got too much change, he would give it back. And having integrity was important to him. And he was one of these guys, his word was his bond, if he said it. And I've always liked the definition, integrity is what you do when no one else knows and no one else may find out. Are you true to your principles and your values and your beliefs? And I've imperfectly tried to follow my dad's example of being honest in my dealings, in telling the truth, and in not shirking or trying to avoid responsibility for errors, mistakes, or things I've done that I shouldn't. And then lastly, my story about Ben-Hur.
Yeah.
If you want to rise, do the difficult. Look for things that other people can't or won't do. If you can't do them, try to get the skills so that you can. I have one last war story, but I'll tell because it involves Judge Thurman.
Oh.
Judge Thurman had me over in the court, and I was trying to get some evidence in, and he was beating me up one side and down the other. No matter what I tried, I could not get this critical document in. And in fact, I think Bill was kind of laughing at me because every time I'd try a different tack, he had some. And I said, I'm never going to let that happen again. I'm going to master evidence. And so I started at night at home. I was reading evidence books. And okay, if I have this situation, this is how I handle. This is how I would have handled Bill. So again, I tried to take a failure and turn it into a strength. And even though I wasn't accomplishing the difficult, I studied that. Then I had that 7-week jury trial and feel now that I'm comfortable with evidence when most lawyers seem to really struggle with that concept.
Wow.
So those are my three, work hard, be honest, take on new challenges, and prepare yourself to succeed.
Wow. That's excellent.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Wonderful. Wow. Thank you so much, Your Honor. It's a real pleasure to get this opportunity.
Well, this feels very self-indulgent, and I'm kind of embarrassed to have just talked about myself for so long.
No way. It's a pleasure. It's all mine.
They wanted it, so
Absolutely.
There it is.
And for the greater public, it's a real treat for them.
All right. Well, thank you, Max, for agreeing to interview me and
absolutely.
coming up with excellent questions.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you for your time, Your Honor.
All right.